Good afternoon. Hi, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the final keynote of the symposium. My name is Laura Draper. I'm the Associate Program Director at the Tech Law and Security Program, the American University Washington College of Law. And it is my distinct honor to welcome Camille Stewart Gloster as our final keynote. Camille is currently with CAS Strategies, LLC. She is formerly the Deputy National Cyber Director. I had to write this down because her resume is extensive and impressive, and I don't want to miss a word. The former Deputy National Cyber Director for Technology and Ecosystem, where, among other things, she worked on drafting and implementation of the 2023 National Cybersecurity Strategy, which we will be asking her about in a moment. Prior to joining the White House, she was the Global Head of Product Security Strategy at Google, and she co-founded the Share the Mic in Cyber movement and the Next Gen NatSec initiative, both designed to, both designed to support the investment in skilled and diverse workforce. And I'm so glad to have her join, in no small part because she also happens to be an alumna of this esteemed law school.
So nice to be back, although we used to call it We Cater Lunch.
So this is the third annual symposium on cyber and international law. And throughout our 3-year tenure in planning and executing this event, we have relied upon and been strengthened by our partners with the Fetterman Cybersecurity Research Center, NATO Cooperative Cyber Defense Center of Excellence, and the National University of Singapore, as well as, of course, the Lieber Institute at West Point. And our commitment to global and international engagement is further demonstrated by our lineup of speakers that we've had today and in the past years as well. And I know that the National Cybersecurity Strategy also puts a really significant emphasis on international partnerships and collaboration. Could you just take a minute to elaborate on that objective and why it is so critical?
Yeah, how many of you are familiar with the content in the National Cybersecurity Strategy? So I'll give a little overview for those that aren't familiar. The strategy sets an affirmative vision. One of the reasons that it is a deviation from the past and a revolutionary strategy, one might say, is that rather than being responsive to the threats of today, it sets an affirmative vision for a digital ecosystem that is secure, defensible, resilient, equitable, and then all of the pillars underneath that strive to move towards that desired end. So that might still be responding to the adversary, but it is through the lens of us establishing the values we seek to have and moving towards a digital ecosystem that we all can share in and that is working in our favor and recognizes that technology shows up in the lives of people. And to truly do that, we have to recognize the fact that there are no borders on the internet, that technology has allowed us greater connectivity and means that our futures, our success is inextricably linked. And so the international pillar of the strategy is extremely important because it talks about that very concept and says that to truly achieve the things we want to achieve domestically, that means we have to learn from our partners, build with our partners, and help our partners achieve those same goals to the extent that they are aligned. And also recognizes things like global supply chains and how interconnected those are. And so the international pillar is quite important and really is demonstrated in even how the government has started to organize itself with the creation of CDP office in state, and even the focus on international of the Office of the National Cyber Director. So that pillar is integral, and you'll see it woven throughout even the derivative documents that came out of the National Cyber Strategy.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And this pillar that you're talking about, pillar 5, for those of us keeping track at home, also speaks to the UN group of governmental experts and open working group processes that the United States has played a pretty significant role in. And it commits the United States, and I'm going to quote here from the strategy itself, because this language is better than anything I would have come up with. It commits the United States to reinforce the applicability of existing international law to state behavior in cyberspace, uphold globally accepted voluntary norms of responsible state behavior in peacetime, and punish those that engage in disruptive, destructive, or destabilizing malicious cyber activity. So I'm hoping that you can elaborate on this. And in particular, one of the topics that we've really talked about a lot over the past couple of days is the fact that international law, understandings of how international law applies in the cyber context are still relatively nascent and evolving. And some areas are still subject to pretty significant disagreement, even among our allies and partners. So how do we navigate those differences to really collaborate effectively?
Yeah, so that phrasing recognizes the demand for accountability, internally and externally, and the drive to hold ourselves accountable to the values that we articulate, but also push our partners and the broader international community to do the same. But you're right. I mean, international law has not caught up to the problems that we are facing today. Although, we are trying to make great strides there. There is, and I would venture to say, by design by some actors, no alignment, because it gives you room to kind of do what you need or want to do in terms of espionage or cyber attacks, and determining where that red line is fuzzy. So people continue to push the boundaries on where that might be. And until we can articulate that in a way that is holistic, each country will have to articulate that for themselves. But honestly, in the absence of that, even if you articulate it for yourself, you end up kind of fudging the lines on that, because if your partner says that that's not far enough or too far, you start to have to do some negotiating to make sure that you're bringing your partners along with you for the journey. So there's a lot of work to be done in that vein, and a number of investments being made to carve out spaces where there is alignment to make progress and articulate international law in a way that allows for us to be able to operate and expect some consistency of behavior and hold people accountable, hold ourselves accountable, hold our partners accountable. I don't think we'll make meaningful progress in the places we really would like to make meaningful progress in the near term, because there are some really divergent views, and the countries that need to get on board are unlikely to do so in the near term. It does not work in their favor. And quite frankly, the ambiguity, it serves everyone's specific interests at the moment. Until as a collective, we realize that that is not true, it'll be hard to nail down some of these key concepts, like especially where the red line is.
I think that's absolutely true. And I think that's certainly pretty consistent with some of the discussions tension between the optimism and pessimism. I think we're more or less hearing the realistic skepticism. So,
Mike. You should and share.
Oh, we could share. That's true. All right, let's try that for a moment. Okay, so another area that we've been seeing this in, and another area that partnerships are really emphasized in the strategy, is around Pillar 2. And specifically in Objective 2.2, which again, for those of you who haven't just memorized the language off the top of your heads, I have it here and we'll share. Objective 2.2 is to enhance public-private operational collaboration to disrupt adversaries. And Objective 2.5, which is counter cybercrime and defeat ransomware, topics that we've been discussing again for the past couple of days. What do you think the strategy envisions here? And what are some of the legal or policy obstacles that you see to implementing these objectives?
So public-private, I hate public-private partnerships as a phrase. Public-private collaboration is usually what I lean into, because I think there's a lot of baggage with the term public-private partnerships. People think about threat indicator sharing and just kind of sending TTPs across to a partner, and no real value being added because it's too late and not as valuable as you want it to be. And so what I hope folks have seen in not only the development of the strategy, the implementation of the strategy, and in how the government is organizing themselves, is a true move towards collaboration. And to advance the specific goals that you're talking about, there has been a lot of progress made and a lot of creativity used to achieve progress on ransomware, on cybercrime in general, and across a whole host of different issues. And the CCRI, the Ransomware Initiative, has been a really great demonstration of the global community coming together around combating ransomware. And the tactics being used by DOJ to get the money is also a really great demonstration of the creativity and ingenuity and innovation that'll be necessary to combat crime as it evolves, especially ransomware as a service, where you can kind of shop out ransomware to anybody. Crime of opportunity continues to be the biggest threat vector. And so what you've seen is not only this creativity and ingenuity within government, but that collaboration across the private sector to get new lines of visibility, to get new capabilities, and to have a partnership that, although I hate the word, a partnership that allows for making more progress and much more quickly. And so across that pillar, not just there, but across that pillar, you've seen that domestically and internationally, and that sharing. I mean, you've seen it in, and I know we're going to get to this, the UN Cybercrime Agreement, the convention, is another example of like making progress on what tools and capabilities do we need to be able to share effectively and to be able to identify the malicious actors that we would like to actually put in jail and stop from the behavior. Because it's one thing to stop the money and stop that instantiation of a ransomware a ransomware organization or a ransomware attack. It's another thing to actually get the people, especially at senior levels, who are doing the work and be able to make those direct ties to leadership, especially if it's nation state backed.
Well, it's as though you're reading my mind. Who knew? So on Monday, the first day of the conference, we actually closed with a very, I'm going to say, robust discussion of that UN Cybercrime Convention. And there were some strong views presented on both the potential benefits and also the substantial risks that the convention presents and that adoption of it would present. Given the fact that you are not in government currently, I was wondering if you could share with us perhaps your sense of the convention, and of course, not representing anybody but yourself, and how you think the US should approach it going forward.
So I don't think anybody's wrong. I think that there's a lot of opportunity for the convention to be used in the wrong ways, but it also creates a lot of opportunities for collaboration, a lot of avenues for collaboration that are necessary and timely. What I have found is that perfect is the enemy of the good, right? That's the phrase. And often in policy, until we have got it perfect, we do not want to launch something. We do not want to venture out and try to make a change. And to me, I was not at the meetings to, create this, but to me, what this is not letting perfect be the enemy of good and making some progress. It sounds like law enforcement got a lot of what they needed or think they need or wanted. And what I hope not only the US, but all of the partners will do is adhere to that accountability that was articulated earlier and is reflected not only in the US cyber strategy, but in many of our partners' cyber strategies, because we help them articulate their visions for what their cyber strategy should look like. That accountability piece will drive them towards tweaking the convention in ways that need to be tweaked. And I hope that the US as a leader will stand firm on identifying and pushing back on instances where there is overreach and we need to make changes. We should not feel that anything is set in stone and there's an opportunity to refine the convention. And so I think that should be the focus moving forward. It has been passed, the work is going to move forward. And so as we identify ways that it is being used not in alignment to its intention or being abused or was just an overreach such that privacy and security is actually not being served, that we should change that.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. One of the things that I had not referenced in your bio, but I know that you also have done. While you were at the White House, you worked a lot on the executive orders related to data security and also artificial intelligence. As this is 2024, I do not think we can let a moment go by without asking you about artificial intelligence. I know that you've also currently in your current work have been working on it. I was wondering if you wanted to share any insights or thoughts on how that might relate to some of these discussions and issues.
Yeah, so I mean, artificial intelligence is the next instantiation of our technological evolution and a chance for us to get it right. We have learned so much from how the internet changed the way we connect and operate, and how social media changed the way we connect and operate. And what I hope that we're seeing through some of these summits that are being hosted by countries, the UK AI Safety Summit, the Seoul AI Safety Summit, and now the French AI Action Summit, in addition to UNGA and other convenings that are talking about these issues, is a realization that to be proactive, to incorporate the lessons learned that we have, to create a values-driven technological environment that is AI forward, that we need to implement some of the things that we have seen. And the first two summits, the safety summits, were very focused on Western countries with a few global majority countries involved. And this next one broadens the dialogue and invites more of the global community into the conversation. I think that's a real opportunity to make advancements on that international pillar that we talked about, to create economic opportunity, but also to create a governance structure and the rules of the road and boundaries that everyone can buy into early. The concerns that have come out about AI present a real opportunity for meaningful engagement, because people are terrified in some extent, hopeful in others, and kind of mixed emotions that draw people towards the middle to be able to have a conversation. And so in this moment, I hope that countries will come together to do that work. And so I'm actually planning a summit to bring some global majority countries together to inform that AI Action Summit. Also, I work with a coalition of CEOs for deployer companies. So a lot of the conversations that have been happening, a lot of the engagement that happens is with foundation model companies, the OpenAIs and Googles of the world. But these are NFLs and MasterCard and other organizations that deploy AI. And in this co-creation environment where a foundation model is then adapted to a company's needs and then has proprietary information put into it, and maybe you change the algorithm to adapt to your needs, there is going to be a lot of responsibility, and the perspective of deployers needs to be woven into the policy conversation and the governance conversation that we have. And so we're actually tomorrow going to release a paper that kind of talks about high-risk use cases and how that should be articulated and legislated around. And maybe you've read a lot of articles that talk about, let's use the existing legal frameworks that we have to govern AI. And I think that's right. It will require training, it will require new staff and an investment in talent. But to pull the conversation about how AI changes the healthcare space or the financial sector out of the hands of the folks that are steeped in those sectors, I think is going to do a disservice. That said, there's still a lot of opportunity for some holistic rules of the road and governance on AI. And so the paper kind of balances those two things and articulates a perspective on behalf of those companies. So I think there's a lot of interesting work to be done. And if you have been working in this space, whether it's from an international perspective or you've been working on emerging tech and cybersecurity issues, those are the perspectives that we need to weigh in on this new frontier of technology and shape it early.
Wonderful. Couldn't agree more. And I think it's so important that we're thinking beyond the people who are just developing the algorithm, because you're absolutely right. The people who are trusting those algorithms with their data need to have a stake in this and a voice in this, because.
And they have the power to make the companies that have the foundation models change what they're doing, right? Just think if the deployer companies make a demand of a big foundational model company, how much power and weight there is in that. Money talks. I mean, that's why the strategy talks so much about market incentives and about shifting the burden from the small players to the big players, is because there's a recognition of power dynamics and leveraging those to our benefit to achieve the desired ends.
So true. And I think that's just so important. And I want to make sure we offer lots of opportunity for questions. I have many more questions I can ask you, and I could probably talk to you for days if you let me. But I'm not going to bore everybody with that, or you. Before we turn to the audience for questions, given that we are here at your alma mater, and we are very proud of that fact, mind you, and we have some students in the audience, and we also, I expect, will have students watching the recording at a later date. I wanted to give you the opportunity to speak to the current students about any advice you might have for them as they embark on their legal careers.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I would think about working in the tech space. These issues are so interesting and ever present in your lives. There's no one who's not touching technology. Now, that said, if you have a passion for healthcare or for international relations or all of these things that traditionally might have felt like they were disconnected, you can do them in this context. And even if you don't decide to do them in this context, you should be aware of this context. So I encourage you to kind of keep pace with an understanding of how the technology and security and privacy issues are moving through your area of work. I would also say take advantage of venues like this. This is an amazing opportunity. You've got a room full of experts. You've got alum in the panels and on stage, but also in the audience, and make the introduction, ask a question, show your thoughts by analyzing an issue and sharing your perspective. It's a great opportunity to make a connection that will pay dividends. I feel like networking was the biggest value that you could get outside of the classroom by being in law school, and especially being in law school in DC. And then the last thing I would say is don't let job title keep you from an interesting role. I've seen a lot of people walk away from things because they wanted X title or Y title, but didn't look past that to see the opportunity. And particularly in a tough market like this, I would say look past the title at the responsibilities and the opportunity in that organization to be able to build something more robust, and you might find yourself in the perfect job.
I think those are all fantastic. That's fantastic advice. We were talking before about the value of networking and how this is the time, students, to take advantage of folks who want to help you and want your careers to succeed. So talk to Camille when she's available, which is not going to be at 2:30 today because she's going to go catch a flight. But generally speaking, you should certainly connect with your alumni. And with that, I want to give opportunity to folks in the room to ask questions.
While we wait for a question, I'll give an anecdote about that. My job at the White House came because I built, through one of those initiatives you talked about, I built a mentorship program with national security leaders. And I got paired with Chris Inglis. And I spent 9 months during the pandemic telling him everything I thought about what the Office of the National Cyber Director should be and who should do what and when, And then when this person was named, I was like, here's what should happen next. And just pontificating, getting to know him and just telling him about my experience and what I thought the world should look like. Little did I know he would get appointed as the cyber director and decide that I needed to be his deputy. But you just never know where these connections will lead to something, maybe not that direct as you go work for that person, but they might connect you to someone else.
That's fantastic. And for what it's worth, I was going to read in your bio, I was going to present and read several quotes from Chris actually speaking about how fantastic you are, but I will not embarrass you with those at this point. So that works, connect with folks. Eric, you had a question?
Yeah, so many of the prior cyber strategies kind of talked about cyber in a silo, just as a cyber thing. This new cyber strategy obviously goes a very different direction, embraces integrated deterrence, all of those things, and treats it really as an integrated approach. What was the thinking behind that? Where was it that you wanted this to take us?
Great question. That was intentional. I think it was a recognition that cyber could not operate in a vacuum. And also, to the point about public-private collaborations, we had a lot of conversations with our private sector and civil society partners in developing the strategy. I believe we had over 400 different organizations or people come in to preview parts of the strategy, give us feedback, that kind of thing. So it was born of a recognition that cyber is not optimized in a vacuum and cannot be in a vacuum. And then also the feedback from our partners on how it was impacting them, what they saw in terms of the threat landscape and how that would evolve. And those partners include obviously the interagency because we all wrote it together. But it was the culmination of a lot of feedback and a recognition that we had to change direction to be effective.
Yes.
So the word Congress appears in the document 13 times, and oftentimes in the same way. The administration will work with Congress. And I'm curious, what do we do when it's impossible to do exactly that?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that is very artfully and intentionally worded, right? We couldn't say Congress must, or we're gonna pass it over to Congress to do, or hopefully Congress will. We had to recognize that we could feed the information to Congress and hope that it got prioritized and there was some alignment. We are in a moment where it is hard for us to find a bipartisan solution on things. Traditionally, that hasn't been cybersecurity though. So there are some places where we recognize that we might be able to make some progress. But by and large, we knew that it was a tough environment to rely on Congress to make progress in the timeframe that we hoped to make progress. So that statement recognizes that. What can you do? You find every way to make progress in the absence of that, and you know, dive in on the places where you have the authority and control to make changes and to advance. And so that's what we've done. That's what we did. And what I hope that they are continuing to do is to make investments from the executive branch perspective that allows them to do that. Now, the Chevron decision has the potential to change the ability to be effective. I personally think that cybersecurity is not the place that's going to feel it the worst. But what I could see happening is decisions made based on Chevron could then be leveraged in the cybersecurity domain when someone is unable to or does not want to do something. And so we'll just have to see how that plays out. I hope that it won't be detrimental, but we do find ourselves in a very interesting moment where if Congress is not making progress and Chevron changes the very nature of executive branch agencies' ability to be effective, how will we make progress on this very important issue?
For students listening briefly, I will just note that if you're not familiar with the Chevron decision and the subsequent overturning of the Chevron doctrine, come see me afterwards and we'll talk about it.
In the right place.
Yuval, you had a question.
Yeah, thank you very much. We talked yesterday about anonymity and information operations, and I wanted to hear from you a little bit. What do you consider to be the trajectory of the U.S. approach with regard to disclosure obligations that private companies may have with respect to malicious actors? And whether something like the standoff that we have between France and the CEO of Telegram could actually, you see the United States going in this direction. I didn't see the U.S. actually taking a public position on this specific face-off. Some countries have. Where is the U.S. on this issue?
Yeah, I can't speak to the position of the administration. And I actually would venture to guess that we won't take a position. We are at the tail end of an administration that is definitely going to end. And so I think President Biden would let the VP, if she wins, articulate a perspective. And then if the election goes to former President Trump, then he will articulate a perspective. So I don't think, unless their hands are tied and they are pushed to make a statement, I don't think the administration will make a statement about this. In terms of, vulnerability disclosure as a whole, I think how the U.S. engages with some of these social media tech companies is pretty obvious. I think TikTok is a good example of where we're headed. I think we will see a little bit more of the follow through there as we approach the deadline and as we see how some of these cases shake out. And I actually think that in a Harris administration, they might be a little bit more bullish. From a leveraging vulnerabilities to advanced desired ends, I don't think anything will change there either. I'm being a little cryptic, but yes.
That's fair. Other questions? Gary, I know you have a question.
Thanks. My question is a kind of two-part around disruption,
Mhm.
which definitely has a place in the strategy. The strategy was very sort of groundbreaking, one in terms of the shift of responsibility to the private sector. But I think the collaboration that you're talking about isn't just continued collaboration as we've seen it. It's calling for a different type of collaboration, which the little value that it carries, I think, is very important. But it does touch on some things we've talked about in the symposium. One is within that, there is also, I won't say an endorsement, but certainly an inclusion with some qualifying language of the defend forward notion and disruptive activities, which by channel some of the foreign partners here, well, what does that mean? And how do you base that legally? So maybe you could talk about it a little bit, but also the collaboration itself for disruption. We just had a panel where one of the issues that was discussed was what are the implications for private companies when they begin to involve themselves in some of these activities, especially with relation to conflicts like Ukraine and so on, and how do we manage that? So, you know, in thinking through inclusion of those things in the strategy, just your thoughts on those pieces.
Yeah, so I'll take the second question first. No company should, of their own accord, try to lean into engaging with a nation state in an attempt to, you know, defend forward or be proactive about cyber defense in that way. Any coordination that is happening to facilitate that should happen with the federal government, and they will be at the front helm of that. That said, though, there are a number of nation state attacks that are being waged against private companies every day, and the demand signal for additional support is only increasing. CISA has the ability to support, in certain instances, Department of Defense has the ability to support. There are ways to support, but there is a demand signal and a recognition that we might need to be more proactive about that. How we do that is, quite frankly, still being figured out. And there has been some progress made, but the thing that I'm heartened most by in terms of the collaboration piece that you talked about is that a lot of that is happening in collaborative spaces, in spaces where the private sector is talking to the agencies within the federal government and talking about the contours of how that might happen, what the boundaries are, what their legal limitations are, what their concerns are from a brand impact all the way to resilience of their operations perspective. And so I think that we'll continue to make progress, incremental progress, because I don't know that there's a holistic solution or a one-size-fits-all solution for that matter. Depends on the nation state, it depends on the conflict, it depends on all of these things. But there is a recognition that we do not want to deter the kind of support that happened in the Ukraine context as well. And we learned a lot from that. And there was a lot of great innovation and coalescing around a cause that happened there. And so some of that has been captured in ways and enabled in ways that I think is powerful, but running into a conflict is not what what organizations should pull from that situation, but providing support when it's coordinated with the federal government and thoughtful and, you know, aligned to goals and outcomes, I think is something you'll probably see more of, which will also bring us to a place where there is some tension there, because that means there will be inequity in how that is done. Because if a private company is picking where and how they engage and provide support to different countries, depending on the conflict and the side of the conflict, we will inevitably have to reckon with what that means and how the US shows up, because our companies are going to be a reflection of us, particularly if it's done in alignment in the ways that it should be if you want some kind of protection. And so I think we're making our way to some very difficult territory where we'll have to make some really tough decisions. And then the defend forward piece, yes, there is a recognition that you have to continue to be proactive about understanding. I mean, you all have seen Volt Typhoon and all of the adversaries that are in our networks, especially in our SCADA systems. There is a global recognition of the espionage and positioning that is happening nation by nation. And so the blurriness that we talked about before, the lack of understanding of a red line, I think creates space for those things. But the US is operating Defend Forward under a set of principles that keeps it in a set of boundary that it thinks is appropriate.
Other questions? Oh, yes, please, Catherine.
Yeah. Hi, I'm Catherine Rawhut from the Center, and I wanted to go back to the National Cybersecurity Strategy, and I don't remember which pillar is. It might have been 3 or 4 that talks about mobilization of market forces to incentivize voluntary adoption of better cybersecurity. And I wanted to know if you know where that stands, if there are committees that are working on this. Do you have any information?
Yeah, so the entire Secure by Design effort out of CISA is a big part of that work. But there's also discrete efforts to leverage market forces to move the industry in a way. Whether that is leveraging the infrastructure investment through CHIPS and IRL and all of the other investment to drive industry to adopt certain best practices, whether they're national security focused, cybersecurity focused, or workforce. There's a lot of workforce investment happening. There are initiatives within each organization. There's a new view on how we make investments even across the federal government, and you'll see that in some of the implementation. There is a realization that the federal purse is a really strong driver in the market. And so you'll see some changes in how the federal government spends its money in alignment with its goals. That's why you see SBOM being mandated across the federal government and a few other things that are also tied to Executive Order 14028. So there's a lot of initiatives that tie back to that. That's kind of the undercurrent of a lot of the work is how do we leverage market forces? How do we push industry to align itself to the values that we have articulated? And so there's a number of efforts, but I think the Secure by Design one is probably the clearest in the sense that it's asking companies to make commitments and it is pushing for a set of behaviors, and there's a framework for folks to follow. And it's in addition to driving market forces, it's trying to engage the private sector to change very concrete behaviors. The other thing that's an example of it is, if you've heard about this memory safe languages push, that's another good one. So open source software and software in general can be built on languages that are not memory safe. And if you are to migrate platforms, code bases to memory safe languages, you could mitigate up to 70% of the vulnerabilities. Now, that's not an easy proposition. Memory unsafe languages are like C and C++, and even if you are not an engineer, not a coder, you know that C and C++ are very common. They also have a lot of utility. For example, in the space sector, they allow for a level of customization that is absolutely necessary. So it's not a universal push, but there is a drive towards using memory safe languages because it mitigates so many risks and it is a scaled way to improve impact. And so some private sector partners are joining in on that. For example, Microsoft is built in C and C++, and Microsoft is so prevalent, but they've committed to migrating to Rust, a memory safe language over the next 10 years or so. That's a huge scaled win for organizations, but it's costly and cumbersome, but it's another example of how that shift in the market is happening.
Great. Did you have a question?
Yes, my name is Anne, private sector. I wanted to ask you from a private sector software company's perspective or cyber infrastructure perspective, who should they be looking to as a primary source of directive? CISA or the Office of the Director now? It's the landscape has become a little more complex and confusing.
Yeah, so intentionally so, a lot of these organizations have overlapping authorities. If this is to work well, my view is that the Office of the National Cyber Director will lead the strategy, the visioning, the setting of the national and international priorities from the US perspective, driving those large scale initiatives that are not just focused on cybersecurity, but focused on that affirmative vision and moving in that direction. The NSC, the senior director for cyber over there, would lead how that plugs into our national security toolkit. And then, of course, CISA leads operational efforts. But then you still have NIST, who's doing a lot of work, and there are a lot of players in this space. Unfortunately, the answer is not as clear as you would probably like it to be, but what I would say is it depends on what you're trying to do. If it is operationally focused, please go to CISA. If it is something related to like where the policy and the priorities of the US government are going to move, I would say go to the Office of the National Cyber Director. If there is a direct linkage to national security, you might want to start at the National Security Council. If you're thinking about like cryptography and cryptological standards, particularly as we move towards a post-quantum future, then you should probably start with NIST or NSA. So it just depends on the topic, unfortunately. That said, we've done a lot of work, or the federal government has done a lot of work to make it such that no matter where you enter, they will get you to the right place. And so I hope that is the experience that you're having. Yes, it would be easier if you knew exactly where to go and you just called up the right agency, but I do hope that they will loop in the right folks no matter where you decide to start.
To be the answer from a lawyer, it depends.
Yes.
Students, that was a masterclass on how you answer things when you are an attorney. Yes, Deborah.
Putting out a paper tomorrow.
Mhm.
Give us more details about it and how do we get it?
So the Data and Trust Alliance is an alliance of CEOs. Like I said, mostly from the deployer perspective. And tomorrow morning, they'll be releasing this paper on high-risk use cases and consequential decisions. And so, I mean, if you looked at my LinkedIn, I will probably advertise it, or the Data and Trust Alliance will be pushing it all day tomorrow. So you'll probably be able to find it pretty easily. Mhm.
Wonderful. Yes.
Hi, another private sector question. So what would you recommend? Excuse me, as it relates to sort of new tech, generative AI, post quantum. When it comes to one with cyber. Perhaps a little bit that up or so when you operate both in the US and other geographies around the world and jurisdictions, different values.
Yeah, my best piece of advice is to get involved. Help shape it in the US and elsewhere. There are so many avenues for that, whether it's the Joint Defense Collaborative, the JCDC out of CISA, or their cybersecurity committee that they have. NSA has one. The Office of the National Cyber Director convenes multi-sector groups on everything from software liability to everything. And NIST has convenings on every topic as well. And genuinely, they do influence how the policy is made. So I would start there so that because the lack of engagement means that the policy is based in theory rather than in practice. And what you want is a policy that has been workshopped with folks that will see the results of the contours of that policy decision and to give that feedback proactively and continuously so that you can help refine the policy. And that includes a better understanding of how the competing priorities of different countries are impacting your business. The federal government wants this to be a landscape that is more harmonized to the extent that it can be and wants to understand the realities of the pressure of the push and pull that you're experiencing as an organization by having to adhere to both the US federal regulations, the state level regulations, and everything that's happening internationally. So I would say the first thing is to get involved both domestically and internationally. And where you're feeling a lot of pain, flag those things. Of course, you're gonna have to prioritize, or you could be involved in 700 different groups talking about different topics or the same topics. So I mean, make sure you're prioritizing, but definitely get involved.
That's great advice, and great advice, I think, for everybody who's interested in this, issue comments, review, participate, attend. That's great. Other questions? Oh, yes, again, Deborah.
So we just published a paper on accountability and cybersecurity.
Yes.
But one of the things that we, in our research, find out is there's not enough data.
Never.
Said about France, for example. In France, you're going to have to report an incident to authority, the legal authorities, if you're going to get insurance and programs. So there's lots of things, different things going around the world. But in the United States, reporting requirements like the SEC overlaps with regulatory agencies, overlaps with the new CISA proposed rules that are supposed to be finalized, I guess, by next October on critical reporting.
Mhm.
It's a mess.
Yeah.
Is anybody working on trying to get some harmonization in the United States on that?
Yeah. So the Office of the National Cyber Director had an effort, and I hope it's still ongoing, about regulatory harmonization. They even had a RFP for comments. You could talk about those pains and make sure that it was informing the work. I think they still have a working group going on around that effort. The hard part is, back to my friend over here, Congress has to take a lot of action, right, to align the regulations that they have set. And so outlining how painful things are at a holistic scale is helpful for us to know where there are opportunities to better align things, or where we should decide which of these regulations should take primacy. But until Congress is ready to take the follow-up action, the pain will undoubtedly still be there to some extent.
Great. If I don't see another question, I am going to ask another. Okay, so one of the topics that we've been talking, kind of the theme of the conference generally is around the integration of traditional cybersecurity threats with the larger problem of malign influence and information operations. And one of the kind of threads that's trickled through this is the human element, and that the human element is really a persistent weakness or strength, probably both. And one of the things that you've really worked on, and as you said, the initiatives you started before you joined the White House and how you ended up meeting Chris Inglis, is through improving the diversity of skilled workforce in this space. It strikes me that having a diverse workforce working against these issues is going to be one of the greatest way of strengthening generally, given the human element of all of this. And I was wondering if you just could share some additional thoughts on that, or what your insights are, or what are kind of the troubles of getting a diverse workforce, and how do we improve this a little bit?
Steps on platform. So this is an issue that I think is really, really important for a number of different reasons. Beyond even the diversity piece, I hate the statement. Yes, hate is like the actual word. I hate the statement that humans are the greatest weakness or the weakest link in security, because it is our job as security practitioners to promote security, and our job as technologists, folks who are providing these products, to think about the context in which technology operates, and to create something that is both usable and secure, usable and privacy forward, and to expect people to take on new behaviors, do things that they are not trained to do, is not a recognition of who your user base is and what their needs are. And we don't do that in any other context of providing products and services to people. And so we have to do better. And so that's why things like secure by design, secure by default, privacy by design are so important, but there's more to it than that. And so the first thing is we need to recognize that technology happens in a context. Cybersecurity is technology, people, and the processes and policies against the backdrop of an adversary. And what do? We tweak the policy and the processes. We try to tweak the technology, and everybody runs scared of thinking about the people. That is a problem. Technology is created by people. It is manipulated by people. It is operated by people. And it is used by people. And so to ignore the human element is a real problem. And so a lot of my work has been focused on that. Like, how do we make sure that we build security programs? I actually wrote a paper on this. How do we make sure we build security programs that contemplate for people and the context in which technology is used, and weave that into the development, the ideation, the refinement of products and services to ensure that we are actually meeting people's needs and it's both usable and secure and safe and private, et cetera. One of the best proxies for that is to have a diverse workforce, because how do you account for how different communities use the technology, which might change the threat landscape or changes the societal context or the cultural context, which then has an implication for risk. How do you account for how malicious actors are moving and thinking and doing their work if you don't understand the context in which they're operating, or the real life lived experiences that motivate them to do what they are doing? We have to account for the people element. And so, like I said, one of the best ways to do that is have a diverse workforce, to have more people with different perspectives who are going to look at that and say, oh, actually, what about this? I use this example often. You all know WhatsApp. It is an encrypted messaging platform that people use often nowadays when they travel, right? To be able to communicate with family and friends and, you know, stay connected. In immigrant communities, it's a lifeline every day. It has become the place of like modern day chainmail. I'm getting random like images from an aunt in this place and random whatever, right? And in COVID, you saw a lot of misinformation being spread that way. They were sending some bush root tea that could fix the COVID. You saw in the election context, people were sending fake everything. And because of that, because someone inside of Meta was like, actually in my community, this is how I use it. And this is why people put more credibility in the content they receive in this context, because it came from their aunt, their uncle, their cousin. And so they started to change the way that the messages show up. It shows you now that it has been forwarded 6,000 times. It shows you that this was copy pasted from other places. And so they were able to make changes that made you more secure because they recognize the realities of the context. That is so important in the work that we do. And I mean, and there are a whole host of other ways that that shows up. For example, I was talking to a practitioner who was competing in a CTF, and he was talking about how the way that they won was they sent the one female team member over to the other teams to be like, oh my God, that looks so cool. What is that? How are you doing that? This is my first one. This is like really interesting. Could you just tell me more? And over the course of that, she found everybody's strategy. She knew everybody's tools, their strategy for how they were going to execute in that CTF. And they won because they were able to use that. They used people's biases. They used the stereotypes people had. They used all of these contextual things and they weaponized them against them. And that's what happens every day. And so if those teams had had a woman, they'd be like, girl, go over there. I'll tell you about it after, right? So, I mean, I think these are the examples that illustrate how important it is to be thoughtful about how we build out our workforce, but also just how we fundamentally think about the human element in this work.
I can't think of a better note to end on. And I think the context, the people, these are the things that motivate me, and I suspect motivate everybody in this room. And I am so grateful for your time, for your energy today, for joining us, even though you're traveling. And thank you again for being here and for representing our school so well. Thank you.
My pleasure.